The kingdom of Namani was a land of great wealth and power, known for its sprawling markets, golden palaces, and the vast riches that flowed through its bustling trade routes. However, beneath this grandeur lay a harsh reality, a deeply divided society where the rich grew richer while the poor struggled to survive. At the heart of this disparity was Adia, a young woman of breathtaking beauty and an even more radiant soul. She lived in the modest outskirts of the kingdom with her aging father, who had once been a prosperous trader but had fallen into misfortune. Adia's father, Mosi, had lost everything to a string of failed business ventures and dishonest merchants who took advantage of his trusting nature. As the debts mounted, so did the threats from those he owed. With no other means left, he faced an unbearable choice, one that would shatter his heart but save his life. The decision was made in whispers, in secret meetings behind closed doors, until finally the fateful day arrived. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the sky in deep hues of crimson and gold, Mosi led Adia to the grand marketplace. He could not meet her gaze, his heart heavy with shame. She, unaware of what awaited, followed obediently, trusting her father completely. The market square was alive with noise, traders shouting over one another, the scent of spices and roasting meats filling the air, the rhythmic beats of drums as entertainers performed for the crowds. But amidst the chaos stood a man who seemed untouched by it all. Cloaked in deep indigo robes, his face hidden behind a veil of silk, he exuded an aura of quiet authority. This was the merchant. Whispers of his immense wealth had traveled far and wide, yet no one knew his origins. Some claimed he was a foreign prince, others a spirit in human form, and a few even speculated that he dealt in magic rather than mere goods. When he spoke, his voice was deep and measured, carrying an air of quiet command. "I will take her," he said simply, placing a heavy bag of gold at Mosi's feet. The clinking of the coins was deafening. Adia's heart pounded. Take her? The realization hit her like a storm. She turned to her father, searching for an explanation, but his eyes were filled with silent agony. Tears threatened to spill down her cheeks, but she held them back. There was no room for weakness. The merchant extended a hand. "Come." Adia hesitated, but what choice did she have? She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders and stepped forward. As she walked away from the only life she had ever known, one question burned in her mind. Who was this man who had bought her? And what fate awaited her in his hands? Adia sat in silence as the merchant's grand caravan carried her far from everything she had ever known. The rhythmic sway of the carriage and the steady pounding of horse hooves against the dusty road only deepened her sense of helplessness. She had been sold, her father's desperate act to clear his debts had sealed her fate. But who was this mysterious merchant who had purchased her? As they traveled through endless landscapes of golden savannas and dense forests, Adia expected to be delivered to a cruel master. She had heard the stories, tales of rich men who treated their wives like property, of those who ruled their households with iron fists. Fear gnawed at her, but she held her chin high, determined not to show weakness. After days of travel, they arrived at a vast estate, unlike anything Adia had ever imagined. The mansion stood at the center of an oasis, surrounded by lush gardens and towering palm trees. Water flowed through carved stone fountains, and exotic birds perched on intricately designed wooden beams. Servants in fine garments bowed deeply as the merchant passed, their eyes filled not with fear but with reverence. Adia hesitated as she stepped out of the carriage. This was no ordinary household. Inside, the estate was just as grand. Ornate tapestries lined the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of burning incense and fresh lilies. She was led to a spacious chamber, furnished with silk cushions and golden lanterns. To her astonishment, the merchant did not lock her away or impose harsh demands. Instead, he addressed her with an unexpected kindness. "You are not a prisoner here," he said, his deep voice calm yet unreadable. "You are free to go where you please." His words unsettled her more than cruelty would have. Why had he paid such a high price for her only to grant her freedom? Days turned to weeks, and Adia cautiously observed her new life. The merchant, whose name she learned was Caleb, was unlike any man of his wealth. He rose before dawn, spent hours reading and writing, and personally oversaw the distribution of food and goods to the estate's workers. Though rich beyond measure, he lived with remarkable humility. There were no grand feasts, no indulgences, only discipline and order. Yet something was amiss. Adia noticed how the servants treated him with an almost sacred devotion, as if he were more than just a man. They never met his gaze directly and spoke his name in hushed tones. There were nights when he vanished without a word, only to return before sunrise, looking exhausted but determined. Curiosity burned within her. Who was Caleb? One evening as she walked through the moonlit gardens, she overheard two servants whispering. "He carries the burden of his secret well," one murmured. If only she knew who he really is. Adia's breath caught in her throat. A secret, a powerful one. And she was determined to uncover the truth. Adia lay awake in her chamber, staring at the ceiling as thoughts swirled through her mind. The whispers of the servants haunted her. If only she knew who he really is. Who was Caleb? She had seen the signs. His discipline, the unwavering respect of the servants, his sudden disappearances. This was no ordinary merchant. Her heart pounded as she made a decision. Tonight she would find out the truth. Silently, she rose from her bed, careful not to make a sound as she wrapped herself in a dark shawl. The corridors of the estate were dimly lit by flickering lanterns. Shadows stretched along the stone walls as she slipped through the hallways, her bare feet making no noise against the cold marble floor. She had memorized Caleb's patterns over the past weeks. He always left after midnight, slipping out through the garden gates. Tonight was no different. She watched from behind a pillar as he emerged from his chambers, not in his usual modest tunic, but in robes fit for royalty. Deep blue silk, embroidered with gold, draped over his broad shoulders. Around his neck gleamed an amulet unlike any she had ever seen, a crest of power. Her breath hitched as she pressed herself against the cold stone, her heart beat loud in her ears. Who was this man she had been sold to? As Caleb disappeared into the night, Adia followed. She moved with caution, keeping a safe distance as he strode through the estate's gates and onto a hidden path leading into the forest. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming acacia trees. Crickets sang their nightly tune, masking the sound of her hurried footsteps. The path twisted and turned, leading her to an open clearing where torchlights flickered in the darkness. She crouched behind a tree, peering out at the gathering before her. What she saw nearly stole the breath from her lungs. A group of men stood in a tight circle, their armor gleaming under the moonlight. Warriors, proud and strong, stood in formation, listening intently as Caleb spoke with quiet authority. "This kingdom has suffered long enough," he declared, his voice steady and commanding. "The corruption within the court grows worse by the day. If we do not act soon, the people will suffer beyond measure." The warriors nodded in agreement. "The king grows weaker," one of them said, "and his advisors are like vultures, feeding off his failing rule." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That is why we must be ready. When the time comes, we will restore justice." Adia clutched her shawl tightly, her mind reeling. Caleb was no merchant. He was someone of immense power, perhaps even nobility. Her pulse quickened as realization dawned. He was not just involved in kingdom affairs. He was leading them. But why? And why had he chosen her? She stepped back, ready to retreat before she was discovered, but her foot snapped a twig beneath her. The sound echoed through the clearing. The warriors turned sharply. Caleb's piercing gaze met hers. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. The truth was out. Adia stood frozen as Caleb's piercing gaze locked onto hers. The warriors tensed, hands hovering over their weapons, ready for an order. Her heart pounded like a drum, every muscle in her body urging her to run. But she knew, there was no escape. "Come forward," Caleb's voice was calm, but there was an undeniable authority in it. Slowly, Adia stepped into the clearing, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. The torches cast flickering shadows on her face, revealing her wide, uncertain eyes. Caleb studied her in silence before he dismissed his warriors with a mere flick of his hand. They obeyed without question, disappearing into the night like ghosts. He took a step toward her. "You followed me." Adia swallowed hard. "I had to know the truth." He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "And now that you do?" She hesitated. "Who are you really?" A small smile played at the corners of his lips. "That is not a question I answer so easily." He paused. "Tell me, Adia, do you fear me?" The truth was complicated. She should have feared him. He was powerful, more powerful than she could have ever imagined. But he had never harmed her. Never forced her to do anything against her will. In fact, he had shown her nothing but kindness. "No," she admitted. "I don't fear you. But I don't understand you." Caleb nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Understanding takes time. But trust must be earned." He studied her for a moment before speaking again. "I will not punish you for your curiosity. But now that you have seen what I truly am, I must know something in return." He turned slightly, looking up at the vast sky. "Loyalty is not just given, it is proven. If you wish to stay by my side, I must know your heart. His gaze met hers again. Are you willing to be tested? Adia's brows furrowed. Tested. Caleb nodded. 3 trials. If you pass, you will earn the truth you seek. Her stomach twisted, but she lifted her chin. What kind of trials? A faint smirk tugged at his lips. The kind that will reveal who you truly are. The first test, the riddle of wisdom. That night, Caleb led Adia to a quiet chamber in his estate. In the center of the room stood a single table, upon which sat an intricately carved wooden box. Caleb gestured toward it. Inside this box is something more valuable than gold, yet it cannot be held. It is sought by the powerful but is useless to a fool. Tell me, Adia, what is inside? Adia furrowed her brows, considering the words carefully. More valuable than gold, yet intangible. Sought by rulers but wasted on fools. She inhaled sharply as realization struck. She lifted her chin and met Caleb's gaze. Knowledge, she answered. A slow smile spread across his face. He opened the box, revealing an ancient scroll. Correct. Knowledge is the true wealth of kings. You have passed the first test. The second test, the trial of courage. At dawn, Caleb took Adia beyond the estate walls, deep into the wilderness. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, but something in the air felt different, tense. He stopped near a clearing where a tall wooden cage stood. Inside, a beast paced, massive with golden fur and piercing eyes. A lion. Adia's blood ran cold. Caleb turned to her. This lion has been injured and frightened by poachers. It needs to be freed, but it will not trust a stranger. Your task is to remove the iron trap from its paw. Her breath hitched. What if it attacks me? Caleb's gaze was unwavering. Trust is built on courage. If you show fear, it will sense it. If you show strength, it will respect you. She swallowed hard, stepping toward the cage. The lion's amber eyes locked onto hers. Carefully, she knelt before the bars, speaking in a soft voice. I won't hurt you, she murmured. I'm here to help. Slowly, she reached her hand through the wooden slats. The lion growled but did not move away. Its paw was bleeding, the iron clamp buried deep into its flesh. Steadying her breath, she unlatched the cage door and stepped inside. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to flee, but she held firm. With careful hands she touched the trap. The lion flinched but did not strike. Gritting her teeth, she worked quickly, unfastening the cruel metal. As soon as the clamp fell away, the lion let out a low rumble, stepping back. Adia braced for an attack. Instead, the beast gave one final look before turning and disappearing into the trees. Caleb's voice was warm with approval. You have passed the second test. The third test, the choice of the heart. For the final test, Caleb led Adia to a lavish chamber. Before her stood 2 chests, one overflowing with gold and jewels, the other empty. He gestured to them. One chest will grant you enough wealth to live in comfort forever. The other will ensure the well-being of 100 starving families in the village. You may take only one. Adia's breath caught. The gold shimmered before her, an escape from poverty, from hardship. But then she thought of the villagers, the mothers struggling to feed their children, the fathers working endlessly for mere scraps. She reached for the empty chest. I choose to help the people. Caleb watched her for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, closing the chest of gold with a quiet nod. You have passed. A warmth filled Adia's chest. She had chosen correctly, not for reward but because it was right. Caleb exhaled. You have proven yourself wise, courageous, and kind. Now you shall know the truth. He stepped closer, looking into her eyes. I am no mere merchant, Adia. I am the rightful heir to the throne. Her heart pounded. He took her hands in his. And now I need to know, will you stand by my side? Adia's world shifted as the weight of Caleb's words settled over her. I am the rightful heir to the throne, he said, his voice steady yet burdened with years of secrecy. The air between them felt heavy, thick with unspoken truths. The flickering lanterns in the chamber cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. Adia's lips parted, but no words came. How could she possibly respond? She had spent weeks believing she had been sold to a merchant, only to now stand before a man who was, in reality, a lost prince. She swallowed hard, her heart racing. The kingdom's heir? She echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb nodded, stepping closer. Many years ago I was betrayed, he continued. There were those in the royal court who sought power for themselves. My father, the king, was poisoned and my mother was forced into exile. I was a boy then, too young to rule, too valuable to be left alive. So, I vanished. Adia tried to process his words. The kingdom had long whispered rumors of a lost prince, but over the years the legend had faded into mere stories told around fires. Most believed he had perished. But, how did you survive? She asked, her mind spinning. A shadow passed over Caleb's face. With the help of those still loyal to my family. Trusted allies smuggled me out of the palace before the coup could be completed. I lived in secrecy, moving from village to village, learning the ways of my people. And when I was old enough, I became a merchant, not for wealth but for strategy. It allowed me to travel, to build connections, and to gather those willing to fight for justice. Adia's breath hitched. The signs had been there all along. His influence, the way people respected him, the warriors who met with him in secret. She had simply never dared to imagine that he was more than what he claimed to be. Her hands trembled slightly. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Was I just part of your plan?" Caleb's expression softened. "No," he said firmly. "That was never my intention." He sighed, running a hand through his dark curls. "I never intended to take a wife. But when I saw you that day in the marketplace, something about you stood out. I saw strength in you, Adia. Kindness, resilience. When your father offered you, I knew that if I didn't intervene, you might end up in the hands of a cruel man." A lump formed in Adia's throat. "I didn't want to own you," Caleb continued. "I wanted to give you a choice. A new life, free from suffering. And I see now that you are more than just a woman forced into marriage. You are someone with a heart strong enough to lead." Adia lowered her gaze, emotions swirling within her. A part of her was angry that he had hidden so much from her. But another part of her, the part that had come to know Caleb not as a merchant, nor as a prince, but as a man of honor, understood why he had done what he did. She looked up at him. "Why are you telling me this now?" Caleb took a slow breath. "Because the time has come for me to reclaim what was stolen. My enemies believe me to be nothing more than a forgotten prince, but they are wrong. My allies are ready, the kingdom is restless, and soon I will reveal myself. But before I do, I need to know." He took her hands in his grip strong yet gentle. "Will you stand by my side?" Adia's heart thundered. The question held weight beyond mere words. He was asking for more than loyalty, he was asking for trust, for partnership. Her mind raced through the possibilities. If she said yes, she would no longer be just a merchant's wife. She would be entangled in the fate of an entire kingdom. Danger would follow them, enemies would rise against them. But if she said no, she looked into Caleb's eyes, seeing not just a prince, but a man who had fought his whole life for justice. A man who had chosen her when he could have chosen anyone else. She drew in a steady breath. "Yes," she said. "I will stand by your side." Caleb's grip tightened just slightly, as if silently thanking her for her courage. "Then prepare yourself," he said. "Because once I reveal the truth, there will be no turning back." The kingdom trembled as word spread like wildfire. Prince Caleb, the lost heir, had returned. The news sent shockwaves through the palace, reaching the ears of the ruling king, a man whose reign was built on deception and cruelty. Seated upon his gilded throne, the king's face darkened as a trembling messenger delivered the report. "Your Majesty," the man stammered, "the people speak of Prince Caleb's return. They say he is gathering an army, that he plans to reclaim what was once his." The king's grip on his staff tightened. "Traitor," he hissed. "I should have ensured his death years ago." Rising to his feet, he turned to his generals. "Send word to every soldier. I want Caleb captured and executed before he can set foot in my palace." The call to battle. Meanwhile, in the heart of the kingdom, Caleb stood before his loyal followers. Warriors, merchants, and common folk alike had gathered, ready to fight for the prince they had long thought dead. The kingdom had suffered under the current ruler, high taxes, unjust laws, and a court filled with corruption. The people had endured enough. Adia stood beside Caleb, her heart pounding. She had seen his determination, his strategic mind, and his unwavering belief in justice. But now, as they prepared for battle, she knew the stakes had never been higher. Caleb turned to her. "The soldiers are trained, but they fear the people's uprising," he said. "They need to see that this fight is not just for a prince, but for the entire kingdom." Adia nodded, understanding what he meant. She climbed atop a wooden platform in the village square and raised her voice. "People of the kingdom, listen to me," she called. The crowd hushed, their eyes fixed on her. "For too long we have lived in fear. For too long, We have suffered under a king who cares only for power while we toil, starve, and bleed. But no longer. Today we fight not just for Prince Caleb but for ourselves, for our children, and for a future where justice rules this land." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd, then a roar. People clenched their fists, some raising farm tools, others drawing hidden weapons. The kingdom's suffering had reached its limit, and now they were ready to fight. The battle begins. At dawn the battle erupted. The king's army, clad in shining armor, marched upon the village, their banners fluttering in the wind. But they were met with fierce resistance. Caleb's loyalists, the villagers and former soldiers who had abandoned their corrupt leader. The clash of swords rang through the air. Shields splintered, arrows rained down, and the battlefield became a storm of dust and cries. Adia fought alongside the villagers, using her agility and cunning to evade attacks, striking down enemies with precision. She saw Caleb in the distance, his blade flashing as he cut through the king's guards, his every move filled with purpose. But the king was not one to surrender easily. From the balcony of his palace, he watched the battle unfold, his face a mask of rage. He called forth his elite warriors, men trained in ruthless combat, loyal only to him. They charged into the battlefield, turning the tide in favor of the king. Caleb's forces began to waver, their numbers thinning. Adia's heart clenched. If they lost here, all hope would be gone. The duel. Caleb pushed forward, making his way through the chaos until he reached the palace gates. There, waiting for him, was the king himself, clad in battle armor, a gleaming sword in his hand. "So the lost prince returns," the king sneered. "Come to reclaim what is mine?" Caleb's eyes burned with fury. "It was never yours to begin with." The king attacked first, his blade slicing through the air. Caleb met him strike for strike, their swords clashing like thunder. They fought with the weight of years between them, one driven by greed, the other by justice. The battle raged around them, but to Caleb only this moment mattered. He had spent his life preparing for this, training in the shadows, waiting for the day he could right the wrongs of the past. The king was skilled, but he fought with arrogance. Caleb fought with purpose. Blow after blow, they battled across the grand courtyard, until finally Caleb found an opening. With a swift strike, he knocked the king's sword from his grasp. The blade clattered to the ground. Breathing heavily, the king fell to his knees. His once proud face was now pale with fear. "You have lost," Caleb said, his sword at the king's throat. The turning point. The king's guards hesitated. Seeing their ruler defeated, they began to lower their weapons. The villagers, once afraid of the soldiers, now stood their ground. The balance of power had shifted. Adia stepped forward, her voice steady. "This kingdom belongs to its people," she declared. "And we will not live under a tyrant any longer." The people erupted into cheers. The remaining soldiers, realizing the battle was over, surrendered. The reign of the corrupt king had ended. Caleb turned to Adia, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You made them believe," he said. She smiled. "No. You gave them something worth believing in." With the battle won, Caleb took his rightful place as king, but he did not rule alone. By his side, Adia stood, not as a servant nor as a merchant's wife, but as a queen who had fought for her people. And so, the kingdom was reborn, not through bloodshed alone, but through the courage of those who refused to be silenced. Justice had prevailed. The story of Adia and Prince Caleb became more than just a tale of love and triumph. It became a legend woven into the very fabric of the kingdom's history. Their journey, one filled with trials and unexpected turns, held lessons that echoed through generations. It was a story of fate, resilience, and the true meaning of worth, proving that destiny often disguises itself in the most unlikely of circumstances. The hand of fate. When Adia was sold to a merchant, she had believed her life was over. She had been nothing more than a poor girl from a struggling family, handed over in exchange for survival. But fate had far greater plans for her. She had walked into an unfamiliar world with uncertainty and fear, yet it was within this uncertainty that she had discovered her strength. Had she been born into royalty, she might never have learned the resilience that had carried her through life's storms. Prince Caleb too had been shaped by fate. Born with royal blood but forced into exile, he had lived a life far different from the one intended for him. His identity had been hidden beneath the guise of a merchant, and yet, in losing everything, he had gained wisdom that no throne could teach. Together, their paths had intertwined, leading them to a destiny neither could have imagined. True worth lies in character. Throughout their journey, Adia had been tested in ways that most could never endure. She had faced betrayal, danger, and moments where she could have chosen comfort over righteousness. But what had set her apart was not wealth, beauty, or status, it was her heart. Even when she was powerless, she had held on to her integrity. When she could have chosen selfishness, she had chosen kindness. When she could have let fear consume her, she had embraced courage. It was not riches that had made her a queen, nor was it marriage to a prince. It was her character, her unwavering spirit, and her ability to inspire change in the hearts of those around her. Caleb too had learned what it truly meant to lead. A throne did not make a ruler, nor did power command respect. It was his actions, his compassion, and his dedication to his people that had earned him the right to rule. Their love had not been one of convenience or royal duty. It had been tested in fire, forged through hardship, and built upon the foundation of trust and mutual respect. A story that became legend. As the years passed, the kingdom flourished under their rule. The tale of Adia and Caleb was passed down through generations, retold in villages and sung by storytellers around the fire. Children listened in awe as elders spoke of the poor girl who had been sold, only to become a queen. They marveled at the prince who had lived as a merchant, only to return and reclaim his throne. But most of all, they learned the lesson hidden within the story, that true worth was not found in gold or crowns, but in the strength of one's heart. A legacy that endured. As Adia and Caleb stood upon the palace balcony, looking out over the land they had rebuilt, they knew that their journey had not just changed their lives, it had changed the destiny of an entire kingdom. Adia smiled, feeling the weight of her past no longer as a burden, but as a reminder of how far she had come. Caleb took her hand, whispering words that had guided them both through their hardest trials. Sometimes what seems like misfortune is just destiny in disguise. And with that, their story lived on, not just in history but in the hearts of all who dared to believe in the power of fate, love, and resilience.